all the good things that drones can do have to get balanced against the concerns, the legitimate concerns that people have about privacy, security, and especially safety. Well, there are answers for those questions.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 224. What is DJI doing to make it safer to fly drones? For that question, we turn to Adam Lisberg, Corporate Communications Director, North America for DJI. DJI is the world's largest maker of personal and professional drones. Adam came to the drone world following a successful career in newspapers, from covering murders and fires in Chicago and New York to writing a Sunday column in the New York Daily News as the City Hall bureau chief. He was later head spokesperson for the MTA, New York's transit agency, steering its public communications through train derailments, Hurricane Sandy, and other crises. Adam now leads DJI's messaging on critical policy and regulatory issues affecting how drones are used in America. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Adam talks about the recent Blue Ribbon Task Force report on UAS mitigation at airports, the lack of verifiable data on drone incursions, and the efforts by DJI to create safer drones and safer skies. But before we hear from Adam, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Now you have the option of making a one-time donation in any amount by going to droneradioshow.com/donate. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. And if you'd like to make a monthly contribution, you can still go to patreon.com/droneradioshow. So let's learn how DJI is working to make the sky safer with Adam Lisberg. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Adam to introduce himself.
My name is Adam Lisberg. I work at DJI as our Corporate Communication Director in North America, and I tend to take the lead in our global communications about policy issues. So that involves a lot of safety messaging, security messaging, and talking about what drones can do in the world, the benefits that they bring, and how governments and regulators can work with the drone industry and with drone users themselves to make sure that drones remain a safe addition to the airspace.
Adam, how long have you been with DJI?
I've been with DJI about 3.5 years. I was a journalist for a long time, working as a newspaper reporter, and switched over to the public relations side when I worked for New York's mass transit agency for 4 years, which is quite an experience, dealing with literally 19th century technology in some cases there and going straight to 21st century technology here.
On July 12th, the Blue Ribbon Task Force on UAS Mitigation at Airports released its interim report. It includes lessons learned from London Gatwick's December 2018 UAS incident, as well as over 20 recommendations on steps that should be taken to safeguard airports from UAS incursions. What was your impression of the report?
Just to give a little background on the subject matter, that for as long as drones have started to be a regular presence in the air, so this is the last 4 or 5 years, there have been reports that drones are interfering with traditional aircraft, that pilots are reporting near misses with drones or even collisions with drones. People at airports say they see a drone in the air. And there's really not been a lot of true scientific experimentation about what happens when a drone could come in contact with an aircraft. So people are, of course, very cautious and try to take as much care as possible to make sure that drones don't come in contact with aircraft. So that means, everything from making sure the drone pilots know the restricted areas to DJI installing geofencing in our drones, all the way up through various enforcement measures. But nevertheless, there's been very few proven incidents of drones interfering with aircraft, but it remains a fear for people who fly airplanes and helicopters. And I think you saw the culmination of this at Gatwick Airport in London last Christmas, where there was a report of a drone somewhere near the airport, And as a matter of prudence, the airport stopped flights because they didn't want to have a drone and an airplane on a collision course. The airport has only one runway, so it was difficult for them to figure out how to handle this. But what happened over the next couple of days is they kept getting reports of drones in the air, but they never saw a single one. In an era where everyone has a camera in their pocket on their phone, no one ever got a picture of this drone. The airport authority and the police haven't put out a detailed chronology of where reports came in from, when, where it might have been their own drones that they were flying to try to spot an intruder. And as you know, in any kind of public crisis scenario, rumors spread quickly. And I think at this point, considering the lack of detailed evidence, it's far more likely that by the end, people were spotting anything in the air and thinking, hey, that's a drone.
What were some of the questions or the issues that came out of that situation?
So obviously, a lot of people have taken issue with the airport's response. If there's a drone that's legitimately at risk of being a hazard for airplanes, of course it needs to be dealt with. But it pointed out a real glaring flaw, which is that airports don't have the tools to effectively assess a report of a drone. How accurate is it? Where was it located? Where could it be? Does it pose a threat to the airplanes that are coming in and taking off? Or is it somewhere near the periphery that could be dealt with in the same way that you might deal with a flock of birds on the periphery? This is just something that airports haven't had a lot of experience with. And of course, people would rather be cautious than overly aggressive in reopening an airport if it turns out there really is a drone there. So in the aftermath of whatever it was that happened at Gatwick, the Airports Council International and the AUVSI, the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems in North America, I should say, which is the biggest drone industry group, said, let's get together, analyze this phenomenon. Let's try to come up with some recommendations about how airports can deal with an issue that's not going away, regardless of what ended up happening in this particular case. And the initial report that they put together came out earlier this year. And the official name is the Blue Ribbon Task Force on UAS Mitigation at Airports. The report came out July 12th, recommends that a lot of common sense steps. So, say airports and aviation authorities and the industry should push remote ID systems for drones. This is where drones transmit a signal through some means that automatically identifies what they are, where they are, and in some iterations of the system, even what their mission is and what their serial number is. They also say that airports need to have better planning for how to deal with a report of a drone incursion. They need to have more technical standards and technology, particularly on how to detect drones near airports. And there needs to be more education for drone pilots about how to deal with these issues when they arise. Now, I need to point out, these are all things that DJI agrees with. While we never release sales figures on our own, all the industry analysts say that we have about 75% of the world's drone market. So when you see a headline, good or bad, about drones, there's a 75% chance it involves one of ours. And that we've always thought that position gives us a special responsibility to invest in safety technology and pioneer new safety ideas that can ensure drones remain safe. So that means that we're putting R&D resources and time and money in place and coming up with safety solutions that, you never sell a drone based on its safety solution. All it does is cost us money, but we think it's worth it in order to make sure that society sees drones for the benefits they can bring, not just the worst fears people might have about them.
Adam, tell us about some of the things that DJI is doing on safety.
DJI has always been a leader in coming up with solutions for how to ensure that drones remain a safe addition to the airspace. That started with our commitment to geofencing, which we first put out a limited no-fly zone system for our drones almost 5 years ago. And we've refined it in 2 separate iterations of coming up with a better and more supple geofencing system since then. So now you have a geofencing system that delineates airspace around airports where drone flights are prohibited or could cause issues. You also have areas marked out above prisons and military installations and other locations that could cause trouble. So our geofencing system ensures that drone pilots know the restrictions around airports. They know where to avoid and can help stay away from areas like that. We've invested in hardware technology, everything from batteries that can monitor their condition and prevent you from taking off if there's a problem with the battery or if it doesn't have enough charge. We were the first to develop an automatic return to home system so that if the drone loses contact with the remote controller in the pilot's hands, or if the batteries reach a critically low level, it'll stop what it's doing, automatically return to the place it took off from. We were the first to develop a working remote ID system. Right now, every drone that we make transmits its serial number, its location, its position, its direction, its speed, and also the location of the drone pilot holding the controller in their hands. So with the receiver for that system, an airport authority or a police department, if they get a report of a drone or if they see a drone pop up on the screen of their receiver, they can they'll know exactly where it is. They can see if it's representing a threat to a runway or not. They can send a police officer out to that pilot location to say, hey, who are you? What are you doing? And bring that drone in right now.
Is the remote ID system in operation?
Yes. So we call it Aeroscope. Our drones have to have a constant radio communication between the controller and the drone in order to fly, an encrypted command and control signal and video streaming signal. In addition, there's a separate encrypted signal that continuously displays all the telemetry of the drone, location, altitude, speed, direction, as well as the GPS location of the pilot based on the GPS in the pilot's phone or tablet that is constantly being streamed out there. Now, the drone is sending their signal everywhere, and we sell the receiver system to authorized users like police departments, airports, utility plants, stadiums, etc. They are able to decrypt that signal and display the drone and the pilot locations on a map on a screen. Now, we're not allowed to disclose most of the locations where it's in operation, but it's dozens, maybe hundreds around the world, a mix of stadiums. There are presidential palaces around the world that have it. There are a lot of airports that have it. If a drone takes off or even turns on, even before it takes off, anywhere within a designated area, it sounds an alert tone, and the people working in the control room can look at the screen, see where it is. They can say, oh, that one's actually harmless. It's, 4 miles in the other direction over by that neighborhood where we always see people flying in the park. Or ultimately, they could say, wow, that one should not be near the end of the runway. Here's the location of the pilot. Let's send a squad car over there and find out who it is. 99% of the time, it is not your worst fear of a terrorist or an intentional evildoer. It's just somebody who thought they could get away with it. But thanks to Aeroscope, you can't get away with it if you're using a DJI drone.
We've been hearing that the FAA is behind schedule in developing rules for the remote ID. Yet you're saying DJI already has a working remote ID system. I'm sure it's easier for one company to develop its own system than trying to get multiple players to adopt the same technology. Is that part of the challenge?
You were right that it's a matter of some complicated technology here, and the FAA has not yet indicated what technology channel they want to choose. So some of the choices that you'd have to make in designing a remote ID system for everyone are, do you want it to be a direct broadcast system like DJI's system where it's the drone talking directly to a receiver? Or do you want to have the drone talking to a network? Should every drone be on the mobile phone network or else have a high-powered Wi-Fi signal, say, that would automatically track and monitor and record every drone flight in the atmosphere everywhere? Now, we happen to think that's a bad idea because it would require every drone to have a cellular modem in it. Someone's got to pay for that. It's going to add weight. It's going to add cost. And it's going to mean adding another line to your monthly mobile phone service plan, which I know I don't need. I don't think most people need to pay for another line just to fly a drone. It would also mean that every drone flight is recorded forever in some government database. And even if that database never gets hacked, I still don't like the idea that if I take my kid down to the park by my house, we do a simple basic drone flight. We don't violate any rules. We don't go into restricted airspace. We don't go above 400 feet. We don't bother anyone. No one calls the police and says we're looking in their windows. No one says that we're disturbing their peace. If we do nothing wrong, our flight would still be recorded in the government database forever. I don't like that idea. And I think a lot of law-abiding drone pilots, and most are, wouldn't like that idea either. But there are a lot of arguments on all sides of the issue, and it's up to the FAA to sort through them and come up with its recommended outcomes that it wants and the recommended technology path forward. Now, they've long been delayed in writing their proposed rule for remote ID. It's now scheduled to be released, I believe, in September. We don't know for sure what it's going to say. But remember, when it's the federal government, rulemaking can take literally years. So it'll just be the start of a years-long process where, look, it's a good thing that when the government comes up with an important rule that affects a lot of people, that it hears everyone's perspectives and, gets input from stakeholders and, takes its time to consider it to try to get it right. But in the meantime, without a mandatory remote ID system out there, it's a real challenge for security agencies, airports, et cetera. Now, there's people in Congress keep banging on the FAA, hurry it up, speed it up. We've called for the FAA and for other regulators around the world to speed up the process of developing remote ID standards. And it's gotten to the point where the FAA has, in fact, recommended that drone manufacturers and the drone industry work on voluntary remote ID systems and try to get those in place before a mandatory federal one comes into place.
And that's what DJI has done with the system that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, because we understand it. And, the other factor that people should realize is that security agencies have a real fear about drones. They know that almost everyone who flies a drone is doing it with the best of intentions and doesn't mean to cause trouble, but they are worried, because that's their job, about the person who decides to drop flyers from a drone over a professional football stadium, or, people who would want to do harm or at least cause mischief with drones. And they want to have a way to track drones in the air and to alert large gatherings of people and other situations like that about drones nearby. And they've made clear to the FAA and to others in government that they don't want to see the FAA allow more expanded use of drones for authorized operators, such as routine flights over people, routine flights beyond line of sight, routine flights at night. They don't want to see that happen until there's a working remote ID system that will help them identify troublesome drones. So it's no exaggeration to say the lack of a mandatory remote ID system is really holding back the entire drone industry on a number of points.
And it's like anything involving government regulation. Once the rules are established, companies know the expectations and can work towards compliance. But without any standards, there's really no reason for companies to act. Only those with the resources and the stake in the outcome, say like DJI, will develop alternatives. Other companies may not have the resources or incentives to put anything forward.
Yeah, that's true. And we have indicated since we launched Aeroscope late in 2017 that we would be happy to work with other drone companies on coming up with ways to build on our technological approach. And it's not an offer that we've been taken up on yet, but the offer still stands.
Now, in my notes, I've written the term AirSense. Is AirSense and Aeroscope two different things?
Two different things, yes. We're starting to run out of catchy names for aerial safety technology, but we'll keep going. So AirSense is our latest technological safety innovation. We think it is really significant and has real potential for reducing the potential risks of drones in the airspace. And I'll tell you where we got to this point, which is as we were sitting back and saying, okay, what have we done on safety? Safety is obviously the top priority. What have we done so far? We came up with geofencing. Great, it's in place. We came up with the hardware solutions. We came up with obstacle avoidance sensors for our drones so that they can identify and maneuver around things in front of them. We've come up with all these other solutions. So what should we do next? We said, let's look and see how drones are, in fact, causing problems in the world, in the rare cases when it happens, and see if we can identify some common causes or some common actions that we can take to try to prevent those. So we said, let's look at drone safety data that's publicly available. So we looked at the FAA's database of drone incident reports. You've probably heard about this. This is everything from a pilot says they saw a drone at 14,000 feet while they were coming into land in Phoenix, all the way to there's some edge cases in there where people have reported a drone sitting in someone's driveway or a drone flying a perfectly legal, harmless flight, but they thought the FAA should know about it. So 3 different organizations have gone through the FAA's drone incident database and concluded you can't make any conclusions from this. that it is just too unreliable. There's no vetting. There's no standards. You can't make any sense of this. So we said, all right, so much for the FAA database. What about in other countries? We've looked at data from the UK Airprox Board, which investigates near misses in the air to try to find root causes. Their data also is unvetted, relies entirely on the word of pilots, and some of the incidents that they've put out, all to big media acclaim, have been just clearly implausible all the way up to ludicrous. The idea that an airline pilot flying at 9,000 feet is going to accurately identify something the size of a dinner plate going by them at 200, 300 miles an hour and can accurately report it as a drone instead of a bird or a plastic bag or a balloon that flew up into the atmosphere, that's just ludicrous. We looked at data from EASA, the European Air Safety Association. We looked at data from other European regulators, from Australia, from around the world, and really there is no good set of data about what drones have done bad in the air. So we said, let's look at media reports. Maybe we can find the most sensational cases and see how they fit in. And it turns out when you dig into most of these reports where people claim that a drone has either hit their airplane or their helicopter or come close to it, most of the time there's absolutely no evidence supporting it. And in fact, we found half a dozen incidents where drones were reported to have collided with airplanes. And it turns out it was something else. It was a bird. It was a bat. It was a collision that left no blood traces, but when you took it to the lab, they were able to identify the DNA from bird feathers. There have been at least 2 cases where the nose cone on the front of a jetliner suddenly goes bang and collapses during flight. And pilots blame a drone. When it goes under the microscope for a real technical evaluation, it turns out it was improperly installed and had structural weaknesses. There have been small planes that they think they hit an object. When it goes under the microscope, it turns out that in one case, the windshield had degenerated on flight and it shattered under its own structural weaknesses. So the more, and I did a lot of this research, and the more and more I would dig into these cases, I would find that they're just bunk. And it became infuriating as someone who believes in drones and the technology and the promise that drone technology brings for the world. It's really frustrating to think that around the world we've seen restrictions on drones and proposals to ban drones and proposals to highly regulate drones based on incidents like this. Because, it's when lawmakers and rule makers who don't know any better decide that they need to address the problem of drones hitting airplanes at 9,000 feet, they're putting into place restrictions that don't need to be in place. But they're also ignoring other more common problems that ought to be addressed with that same kind of vigor instead. So at the end of all this research, what we realized was that most reports at high altitudes can be discounted. There's just no evidence they took place. But the only 2 incidents around the world where we've seen demonstrated proof that a drone hit an aircraft involved helicopters, low-flying helicopters that collided with drones. And we know this because there were pieces of the drone that were found in the helicopter when it landed. One happened off the coast of Brooklyn in New York. You've probably heard about this one, where someone was flying a drone at the end of dusk, right before pure darkness, didn't update the geofencing zones on his controller, flew at 2 or 3 miles out farther than he could see, and collided with a low-flying Army helicopter. There's another case that received far less publicity in Israel, where it's more interesting in some ways because neither pilot was doing anything wrong. There's a helicopter that was doing an agricultural spraying mission, registered certified pilot at the controls, following all the rules. Nearby, there was a drone pilot, again, registered, certified, following all the rules, who was doing a survey of a construction site. And, this is a scenario that you see in general aviation accidents all the time. They just weren't aware of each other, were not able to safely keep their traffic separated, and the drone ended up wedged in the landing gear of the helicopter. Unfortunately, in both of these cases, everybody was all right. There was minor damage to the helicopter. Nobody got hurt. But it showed that helicopters, because they fly low, they fly irregular patterns, they're not necessarily confined to airspace near airports, they are a unique hazard for drones. And you can also go online and see a couple of videos that have been posted by people who were flying drones, didn't realize that they were too close to helicopters, and had these perilous near misses where helicopters fly right below them. And And both of the versions that I've seen online, the drone pilot says, wow, I had no idea. I got really, really lucky here. They seem to understand the magnitude of the error there. So through all this research, we said, all right, high-flying airplanes are not the problem. Low-flying helicopters really are at risk. What can we do to address that? Well, in the United States, helicopters and airplanes have used a technology called ADS-B. It's Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast B. I forget what the B stands for. That they are more and more using this system to output their telemetry. This is increasingly what air traffic control is based on. They have to use it in all controlled airspace in the United States by the beginning of next year. This is a constant telemetry signal that shows where the aircraft is, its speed, direction, heading, identifiers, etc. We said we already have the technology to read that information in the airspace and send it to a drone pilot to make them aware of what the aircraft are in the air and be able to steer clear if an airplane or a helicopter is getting too close. And in fact, we installed this system in our high-end professional drones in the M200 series. We figured at the time, people who are buying our most expensive, most capable drones are the people who are most likely to be flying in complicated airspace, near airports, doing professional jobs in those areas. But after reviewing all this data, we realized this is information that even a backyard drone pilot deserves to have. Because if someone flying doesn't realize that they are potentially coming too close to a helicopter, and a helicopter can come up on you awful quick, they could be in a real dangerous situation without realizing it way too quickly. So what we've announced is that starting next year, every new drone model DJI produces above 250 grams, which is generally recognized as a cutoff for the smallest drones, is going to have an AirSense receiver built into it. What that means is the drone pilot, when you're looking down at your control screen, if the system senses that an airplane or helicopter might be heading too close to you, it flashes a light, it barks out a warning at you, and it tells you there's something that it shows the location of that airplane or helicopter on the screen. So this is approaching, you need to get out of the way fast. And in practice, we've heard that the drone pilot will get that warning on their controller before they can even see an approaching helicopter. They're told there's an obstacle heading your way, get out of its way. Now, you could fly drones your entire life and perhaps never come that close to an airplane or a helicopter. But if you do, this is the technology you need to prevent real trouble from occurring in a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. And like I said, we never talk about our sales or our revenue numbers or any market share or anything like that. But it is safe to say that as soon as we start selling drones to the mass audience that have AirSense receivers built into it, this is going to be the biggest deployment of ADS-B receivers anywhere in the world. That's a big step forward for safety, and it really takes us to a new level of assurance about how drones can be integrated into the airspace.
In regard to DJI safety efforts, what's the message to drone operators?
I think through our efforts, through what we've done, we've shown that drone users do want to fly safely and responsibly. Most people don't want to cause trouble. They want to steer clear of hazards in the air. And what enables them to do that the most are two factors: technology and education. The technology, it includes things like geofencing, Aeroscope, now AirSense. On the education side, DJI we take a position that some people find kind of surprising for a drone company. We want governments to require a basic understanding of drone flight before people fly drones. We know that might deter some people from buying a drone and flying a drone. We think that's a reasonable price to pay to make sure that people understand the rules when they fly. And in fact, we've already set up what we call the DJI Knowledge Quiz in several markets around the world, where people who fly drones have to pass a multiple question test about basic factors of drone flight before it'll let them take off. This is every time you register yourself new with DJI. It's basic questions like how far away from you can you fly your drone? How high can you fly your drone? And it's multiple choice, and you have to answer them all correctly before you can fly. We think that drone operators have a role to play here. And we also agree that federal and state and local authorities need proper tools to deal with the rare cases of drones being used improperly. One of the omissions that we see out there is that in cases where people really have broken the law or endangered people with drones, you don't see instances of them being punished. And whether this is because the laws are sort of untested for this new technology, or whether authorities are reluctant to exercise that right, or in some cases because local authorities don't always feel they have the tools to deal with violations of airspace regulations that are controlled by federal law, we think that authorities need the tools they need to enforce against clear cases of drones being operated badly in an intentional way. We also have been very clear that local authorities need the tools, both legal and technical, to deal with drones in a true emergency situation. So as your listeners have probably long heard, right now, most of the ways to deal with a rogue drone are illegal. It's illegal to try to jam a drone in the air because that violates federal communication law by sending a signal to try to take over something. Violates aviation law because you're trying to interfere with an aircraft in flight. Similarly, any kind of mechanic or kinetic tool to force a drone down or shoot a drone down violates federal aviation law that makes it illegal to interfere with an aircraft in flight. So clearly those laws were not written to take into account someone who's protecting a professional football game or a large gathering of people or the White House, how they would do if confronted with what they truly believe is an imminent drone threat. We think authorities need the legal authority and the tools to deal with those situations. That might be another counterintuitive position for a drone maker to make, to say, yes, the government needs more tools to deal with people flying our products. But again, this all comes down to what we were talking about at the very start of this, is that we, as the largest manufacturer, we feel a responsibility to do our part and to encourage others to do their part to make sure drones remain safe in the airspace.
And obviously, one manufacturer can't do it all. It requires a partnership between manufacturers, industry, and the government to create safe skies for drones. Now, these points are echoed by DJI in one of the company's online reports. Can you speak to that?
If you go to dji.com/flysafe, you'll find a link to the 10-point plan we put together about how to keep the skies safe. We call it Elevating Safety. And in there, we have recommendations for DJI ourselves, steps that we'll take for what other manufacturers should do and what government officials should do, because it really is a combined effort. You know, DJI participates in a lot of industry groups in the U.S. and around the world that are trying to work together to figure out common standards and common solutions for some of these issues, which is a good thing. You know, I don't think anybody would want the government just writing regulations without getting input from the people who fly drones and the people who make them and would have to implement them. So there are a lot of different standard setting groups that are talking about things like remote ID, like rules for flying over people, et cetera. We're always happy to take part in that. Considering how many people fly DJI drones, we are the de facto voice for a majority of America's drone pilots. So we see being advocates in this as part of our role.
In regard to safety, what do you think we'll see over the coming months?
You know, obviously I can't talk about new technical stuff. I can tell you that, you know, our commitment is that next year our first new drone over 250 grams will have AirSense receiver installed. And I can tell you that that means ripping up plans for drone products already on the drawing board and, you know, making their way from an R&D lab to figuring out how to build them in the factory. So that's going to throw off some of our timing and mess with some of our planning. But at the time we made the commitment, we weren't entirely sure how we're going to meet it, but that's our commitment and that's what we're trying to keep. So you'll see that from us. From other manufacturers, I hope you will see an additional commitment to safety and them taking seriously the FAA's recommendation for more voluntary remote ID, because it's not enough for one company to be taking these steps. I think the entire industry needs to show it. And look, there are people out there who don't believe in geofencing on principle. They say, I bought my drone, I'm responsible for how to fly it. I don't want the government or a company forcing me to only fly in certain areas. I ought to be able to make that decision. And it's an interesting philosophical take, but we just think as a practical matter that time has passed. Drones are in the skies every day. Drones are doing work all over the country. And the public deserves to know that there are basic protections in place for rogue drones.
And I think that message could use some more work, because when people learn that I do a podcast on the drone industry, their first questions typically have to do with privacy. They seem to support the industry and the job creation, but definitely they have issues when it comes to where drones fly.
We've been talking for a while here, and, your listeners are people who care about drones and care about using drones responsibly. But let's face it, the general public, they respond to headlines that they see, whether good or bad. One day they'll see a story about a drone saving someone's life, and the next day they'll see a story about a drone that supposedly hit an airplane, and they're going to come away with a pretty mixed impression. Your listeners know that drones are, in fact, quite a force for good in the world, that real problems with drones are few and far between. And the message that I think the general public needs to get is that for the concerns that they have about drones, the drone industry has solutions. If you're worried about drones peeking in windows, we have a remote ID system that can tell the local police where the drone is, where the pilot is, what the serial number of the drone is, and they can investigate and determine, was it really a peeping Tom incident, or was it someone doing a roof inspection on the next block and just dealing with some ignorance about what drone technology can do. People are concerned about drones taking down airplanes. We have geofencing, we have remote ID, and we have research showing that drones really aren't that much of a risk. People are worried about drones being used in prisons to drop contraband in the prisons, or drones being used for nefarious purposes. The industry has developed solutions. Government is working on efforts to regulate those solutions. So when people are concerned about drones, solutions already exist. We need to make sure that the general public knows about that. We need to know that the policymakers know about that, and they can make sure that when they come up with laws, it addresses real, legitimate concerns about drones, and it doesn't unfairly cripple a technology that is bringing incredible benefits to the world.
And for my final question, Adam, what message would you like to leave listeners in regard to efforts to promote safer skies for UAVs?
Drone pilots know that most drone pilots want to fly safely and responsibly. They want the tools to do it well. They want the education and the systems that let them be a safe member of the airspace and to do good things with them. Drones are saving lives. Drones are keeping inspectors off of vulnerable rooftops and hanging from the sides of bridges. Drones make it possible to do tedious construction projects without blocking off a lane of traffic or tying up roads or inconveniencing people. All the good things that drones can do have to get balanced against the concerns, legitimate concerns that people have about privacy, security, and especially safety. Well, there are answers for those questions, and it's up to responsible drone operators and drone companies to make sure that the world knows about all the good things that drones do and all the systems that help ensure safety for drones. When people start to really understand what drone technology does, not just based on scary headlines or fear of the unknown, but when they see what drones do that's good and what safeguards there are to prevent drones from being used for things that aren't good, I think they'll get a much better appreciation for what drones can do, and it makes it easier to continue integrating drone technology into the world.
That's it for episode 224 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Adam Lisberg of DJI. I want to thank Adam for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about DJI safety efforts or want to connect with Adam, check out the webpage at dji.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate or patreon.com/droneradioshow. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.